Okay, good evening everyone. Welcome to tonight's meeting of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee. Before we commence this meeting, I request that you've turned your mobiles off or turned them to silent. My name is Councillor Westgold and I chair the meeting of this committee. I will start by introducing my fellow councillors. To my left-hand side, Councillor Lisa Hollingsworth, Councillor Shima Abuki, Councillor Sophie Tawney, our Mayor, Councillor Michael Nolan, Councillor Felicity Sinfield. On the other side of the horseshoe table, Councillor Victor Franco, our Deputy Mayor, Councillor Mal Osborne-Smith, Councillor Rob Ballieu and Councillor John Friend Pereira. We also have Councillor Chris Pattis with us tonight on the screen behind us. I also acknowledge our Manager of Governance and Legal, Mr. Brian Wee, to my left, and Director of Urban Planning, Mr. Scott Walker, to my right. There are other officers here tonight and they'll be introduced as they deliver their reports. The Urban Planning Delegated Committee meeting is being live streamed on the YouTube channel for immediate public viewing. The meeting is also being recorded and will be put up on Council's YouTube after the meeting. The primary purpose of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee is to deal with issues under the Planning and Environment Act and the Building Act. This committee has delegated authority to make decisions on behalf of Council. For those presenting the evening, when we come to the agenda item, it will be introduced by an officer. For those who have registered they want to speak tonight, I will call you forward one by one. If you're making a submission, please present your viewpoints clearly and concisely on why you support or oppose the matter before us this evening. Please do not repeat what earlier speakers have said and keep your submission focused on relevant issues and points not previously raised. If you're opposed to the matter this evening that you're speaking to and any of the recommendations, please tell the committee why you disagree and you might like to suggest alternative approaches that would satisfy your concerns. Please note there is a strict limit of 3 minutes for all speakers. That includes councillors. At the 2.5 minute mark, I've got a little bell here. I will ring, which indicates you have 30 seconds left to finish your presentation. This evening, I'd like to remind you, I don't know if there's anything controversial, but judging by the numbers, there may well be tonight, to show due courtesy to each other and respect to each other, including the committee. I'd just like to finish and encourage you and all submitters to speak directly into the microphone so we can all hear you very clearly. Commencing the meeting. Apologies, Mr. Wee, are there any apologies this evening?
Through you, Chair, there are no apologies this evening.
Thank you. I will now move to the minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of September 2025. Councillors, can I please have a motion to adopt and confirm these minutes? Councillor Abuki. Councillor Friend Pereira.
Happy to move a motion to adopt the minutes.
And we have a seconder, Councillor Abuki.
Happy to second.
Thank you very much. Is anyone opposed? No one. I will now put the motion. All of those in favour? Anyone against? None. I declare the motion carried. Moving to declaration of conflicts of interest. Councillors, councillor officers, are there any conflicts of interest that you wish to foreshadow for matters in this evening's agenda? There are none. We will now move to the main body of the report. Item 4.1, response to the state government's draft mid-rise residential standards. That will be introduced first tonight by Mr. Scott Walker.
Thanks, Chair. I wanted to just give a little bit of context on two key aspects of the draft mid-rise residential standards before handing over to our Principal Planner, Kelly Caparaso, to talk further about the detail in the report. And I think the first thing is to note that this is another one of the many planning reforms that are currently being put forward for consideration, both by the Department of Transport and Planning and in this case by Council, not the community. And there is an interrelationship between these new standards and the other various planning reforms that are occurring. And it's the overlapping nature of these interrelationships that results in a significant change to the planning system and what we might expect in places in and around our activity centres and residential areas. Now, this new draft standard, or draft standards in relation to developments 4, 5 and 6 stories, or apartment residential development to 4, 5 and 6 stories, relates anywhere in the municipality or anywhere where residential development up to that scale is permitted by the zone and overlays. And obviously, in particular, there is an interrelationship with what's happening in and around the activity centres, where there are the new housing choice and transport zones that allow up to 6 stories on the larger sites for the HCTZ1. So, whilst we have heard at different times and at various times that the activity centres are only making certain changes to the planning scheme, it is the interrelationship of these other changes that may result in significant impact or change to these sorts of places. So I think that's the first point here. And I did touch on the second point, and that is that this code was provided or has been provided, these standards, draft standards, have been provided to all councils for comment, but on a confidential basis that they will not be redistributed to the community and not redistributed by council. They have been provided to other stakeholders, such as the MAV and also industry stakeholders for comment, and on the same basis. So that is why you see this evening a confidential attachment that in terms of the council review on a confidential basis and is not available to the wider community. We have taken the option or approach to being quite clear in our report elements of the standards that we have concern with, so that we can explain why we will be putting in a particular submission in the direction that we are, and that is available in the public report. And that was a carefully considered approach in discussions with other councils, in discussions with the MAV, and we explained that this would be the approach that we would be taking to the DTP, so that they are aware that whilst we wouldn't be making the code itself publicly available and being redistributed, that we would be explicit in explaining to the community why the council formed the view that it has when you make a decision on this evening. So those are just the 2 key elements I just wanted to touch on and set the context for what's before you this evening. There will be a future consideration of the draft activity centre plans, which is, as we know, one of the significant reforms underway, and the Tranche 1, Phase 2 or Stage 2 consultation for activity centres, including Kew, Hawthorn, Glenferrie, Auburn, will be coming to the next UPDC meeting on the 20th of October. So that's where you will hear more information about our views on the activity centres and position that we'll be putting forward there. So I'll hand over now to Kelly Caparaso to take us through a little bit more and introduce the report before you this evening.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, I present you PDC item number 4.1 relating to the draft mid-rise standards, which was circulated for feedback by the Department of Transport and Planning. The draft mid-rise standards is for new residential development of 4 to 6 stories. It is proposed to replace and extend the existing Clause 57 standards, which currently relate to 4-storey development. The standards are proposed to operate on a deemed to comply basis which means that if the standard are met, then council must approve the development and there is no right of appeal at VCAT or by objectors. The way DTP has sought feedback from the draft standards is by amending and replacing the existing standards and seeking comments on different options proposed. The introduction of new standards is welcomed for developments of 4 to 6 stories, which recognise that larger built form and apartment typologies have considerations that are different to smaller townhouse developments. However, a number of the proposed standards reduce and weaken the existing requirements, including standards relating to on-site amenity, off-site amenity, and neighbourhood character. These changes will also impact on council's ability to seek appropriate urban design, sustainability, and heritage outcomes. Thank you.
Thanks very much. We have 10 people in our audience tonight who have said that they wish to make submissions. 8 have indicated they are against the recommendations as put forward above us, and 2 are unsure at this point in time. Once I announce your name, I'd ask you to come forward to the horseshoe table, and any submitter that isn't present, we will move on to the next submitter immediately. I'd take this opportunity to remind you of the strict 3-minute limit, and I'd ask you, even though we know many of you from previous submissions, I'd ask you to start with your name and the suburb in which you reside. So tonight we will start with Christina Brannigan.
Okay, my name's Christina Brannigan and I live in Camberwell. Thanks for the opportunity to speak tonight. I'd like to speak in support of some of the concerns that the officers raise, and I think it's important with this new code coming in that we need to challenge some of the thinking behind it because of the issues around democracy and the fact that, as we know, a lot of these plans and codes have been informed by the development industry with really an outrageous lack of involvement by councils and community. And the government really hasn't been given a mandate to do any of these things. So I'd like to just very briefly talk about the impact of some of the new apartment codes on heritage. That first slide there is from a presentation that the Burundara Heritage Group made recently about the fact that really what we're looking at is a plan for no plan for Victoria's built heritage moving forward. That's really what these apartment codes and the heritage and the HCTZ zones mean. And it really does seem to be a plan to diminish our built heritage by stealth. So if I could have the next slide, please. So these new apartment codes are really going to mean very fast and forever residential heritage streetscape deterioration. That's really what's going to happen. Things that wouldn't be permitted today will be. But I guess even more importantly, it doesn't seem at the moment as if councils and heritage experts are going to be able to ensure that whatever happens is done sensitively and thoughtfully, or in a TIMBY way, as the National Trust is promoting. So we can just see a few examples there of the kinds of disruptive and overpowering forms that will come out of this new code, as I understand it, in heritage streets, down narrow streets. And something I think that hasn't been talked about very much is what the impact this is going to have on people who own heritage houses in those in those streets. Not so much about whether they're going to be annoyed about having multi-storey apartments in their street, because I suspect that most of us heritage owners recognise there's going to be some change, but we want it done in a sympathetic way. But if you really think about it, people who own heritage places and councils have looked after these streets now often for years and years. Where I live, for example, 20, 30 years. And really they should be being congratulated by the government for looking after our heritage, not being treated as pariahs. The next slide, please. So some of the HCTZ, and specifically, as I understand it, the apartment codes, could mean that this might be what we might see on heritage streets. So at the top is the before, at the bottom is the after. And prior to these new codes and the new zoning, that would not have been permitted. And in fact, what would have happened was that street at the bottom would have been excluded under the DTP's heritage threshold rules from ever becoming a precinct in the first place. We've just come from a meeting about talking about such issues with some of the councillors and officers today. So why is DTP now saying it's okay to do that in a heritage street? So it really is very concerning. And just to finalise and remind everybody that the Minister has been advised by her Standing Advisory Committee, now by every single heritage peak body in Victoria is on record, telling her and DTP and the senior officers at DTP that heritage is at risk with all of these new plans. And in fact, New South Wales apparently is not putting their heritage into these sorts of catchments or codes.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. Councillors, are there any questions of this presenter tonight? Councillor Abuki.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Ms Brannigan, and thank you very much for the work that you and the Burundara Heritage Gap Group do. I just wanted to ask you whether you felt that the officer's response to the recommendations that were made, whether you agree with those or whether you felt that they missed anything.
I think it's very difficult for the community to comment, isn't it? Because we haven't actually seen the code. But I guess we are trusting of the officers because they've been doing such a great job up until now, I think, trying to get some reasonable outcomes and give sensible feedback. So,
thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms Brannigan, for your presentation. Is it too late to bring up slide number 2 again? Has it been taken? If it could be brought up. On your presentation, I think it was slide 2, and you had reference to 3 to 6 story, but what we're looking at tonight
Yes.
has now been changed to 4 to 6 story. So do you know roughly what the time frame is of when you prepared the presentation to compared to what we're having before us this evening?
Well, this is an edited version of a presentation that we put together, I think, in April, May. So you're right, I should have edited that to be 4 to 6 stories. So, yep.
So that was May, around May, did you say?
Yes, yep.
We're in October, yes. Thank you. My only other comment was, are you surprised to see that it's now 4 to 6 story?
I don't think I can comment on that. I'm not, because again, we haven't seen the code. I'm wondering if the thought there is that there aren't going to be any 3 stories. It's all going to be 4 to 6. Is that perhaps what the implication is? Well, that sounds worse, yes, if that's the case, yeah.
Yeah, look, thank you. I'm just reading from the officer's recommendation, but thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Franco.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms Brannigan. At the end of your presentation, you made a quick passing reference to the situation in New South Wales, not including new growth areas within heritage precincts. Would you like to, or are you able to expand on that?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of details. We're hoping to do more investigating ourselves, but we've been informed that apparently in the equivalent of the catchment zones in Sydney, they are not including their heritage conservation areas, their HO equivalents. They have different terms, yeah, so we will try and find out more, but that's our understanding, yeah.
Thank you, and I have been investigating it, and that is correct.
Oh, well,
thank you.
Okay, good.
There are no further questions, I don't think. Thank you again, Ms Brannigan, for your presentation. Now, before I move off, there is a specific topic tonight. It's to do with the mid-rise residential standards, and I think our first presentation was loosely around that. I can understand there is some concern because there's a closing time of the 19th of this month for the overall planning changes, so we will accept a bit of straying, but try not to stray too much tonight, if you wouldn't mind. I call upon Nerida Muradin to join us. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Nerida Muirda and I live in Camberwell. Hello, councillors and officers. Thanks for the opportunity to speak tonight. I will be brief. Up on the screen, hopefully, thank you so much. Up on the screen are images of the John Beswick Heritage Protected Shops opposite the Auburn Station and also protected houses surrounding the Glenferrie Station area. This is just an example of the type of heritage we have and how we're going to be impacted with these proposed new zones. It would be really awful to see 8 stories above the shops and up to 6 stories in heritage protected streets and streets not included in precincts. Tonight I just wanted to provide some feedback. After speaking with many people while out delivering the BCG flyer, you might have seen this around the place, I'm finding that other residents have no idea that high-rise apartments are proposed by the government. One person thought an activity centre was a sports club. Many traders in Auburn Road and Glenferrie Road don't seem to know what's going on and are really shocked about the proposed zones. I have not received this. I am actually a zone myself. This small postcard, it's quite pretty and purple. This postcard has been the only communication to some people by the government. It is very unnoticeable and does not provide any info really. Therefore, I feel council need to communicate more with the community and let them know what is planned. Perhaps council could consider sending out a letter to residents, have their own drop-in sessions, or put signage around the shopping centres and streets, main streets. Anyway, thanks very much for listening.
Thanks very much. Councillors, are there any questions of the speaker? We don't have any. Thanks for your presentation.
Thank you.
I now call upon Jane Oldham to join us. Thank you.
Good evening, Jane Oldham, Camberwell, on behalf of Burundara Community Group. Firstly, thank you to officers for bringing this important report to the chamber tonight. Once again, we find ourselves responding to yet another state-imposed reform, one developed behind closed doors, confidential consultation with limited stakeholders, and no opportunity for community input, yet the industry gets a say. This draft mid-rise code builds upon the poor outcomes and flawed process of the low-rise code, but with worse outcomes that are of great concern to the community. Further reduced front setbacks, diminished neighbourhood amenity, 20-metre high walls next door without recessing at only a small boundary setback. There's going to be more overlooking and more overshadowing and no regard for what is actually going to be like to live in these new dwellings or the neighbourhoods that are going to be created. A lack of solar assessment for neighbours is especially alarming. Every development in the HCTZ can now reach 4 stories with lot consolidation. Hence, the lack of assessment puts a real risk to solar uptake in these catchments. We also see the same reduction in ESD standards, the elimination of local policies and the watering down of Clause 65 provisions, all which were termed unintended consequences and criticised in the VPP inquiry into the low-rise code. We are, as we think about the 4 to 6 story code, not able, as Mr. Walker has said, to detach ourselves from the other reforms. And in this sense, I'm thinking about the HCTZ. The consultation is so siloed. So anybody who will have attended a drop-in session or a webinar, they won't have heard of the changes to the low-rise code. They won't be aware that there is a draft 4 to 6 storey code. All they'll know is that there can be 4 to 6 stories potentially built next to them or in their neighbourhood. So it is actually really important that we keep stressing that the government needs to be providing proper information, not maps riddled with errors, and a superficial survey that prevents constructive feedback. Finally then, I want to speak to the role of our local councillors. Many residents are asking BCG, why haven't I heard directly from my councillor about these draft maps and what they mean for the neighbourhood? This 4 to 6 storey code just exemplifies how important it is for them to know. In the August bulletin, 3 of the 4 affected ward councillors promised will continue to keep you informed. The 4th made no mention of planning reforms.
Ms Oldham, can I ask you to move towards wrapping up? Thanks very much.
Yet in the October bulletin now arriving, there's nothing in the Mayor's message, and the 2-page planning spread makes no mention of 4 to 6 stories in residential streets and only a quiet reference to 16 stories in a core. Across both editions, we've only seen gentle messages that belie the gravity of what is proposed. So I ask, why so little communication from a council that promised transparency? The community expects all 11 councillors to be visible, vocal and united. These reforms are an assault on what we value most, and they will not deliver affordable housing as promised. Everyone in Boroondara should hear from their councillor.
Thank you, Ms Oldham. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms Oldham. Look, I can appreciate that you are very upset and emotional. I can hear it in your voice and see it in your face, and I understand there is a lot to consider with what's potentially proposed. But you referred to clause 65. I know in the officer report it's quite detailed, but it refers specifically to clause 55 and 57. What element of clause 65 specifically were you alluding to?
My understanding is clause 65 works as a catch-all, so it enables issues that haven't been addressed within the requirements of the planning scheme for the permit to be considered. So that could be, as I understand it, a flood overlay where the flood maps, or sorry, new flooding maps where the overlay hasn't yet been put in place. So the planning officers can consider those increased risk of flooding rather than leaving it to a building surveyor when they actually look at the code. There are others, contamination, health benefits, so things that are actually really important to a planning decision. And with the low-rise code, they were termed unintended consequences. Well, they're not unintended in the 4 to 6 story code. The government knew, they were interrogated on these at the VPP inquiry, and there were specific recommendations and findings.
Thank you very much. I will put a question to the officers later on that one. Thank you.
Councillor Osborne-Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Jane, thank you for your presentation tonight and your continued advocacy on behalf of your community on these very important issues. My question is similar to Councillor Abuki's in the first round. Do you have any comment about the officers' recommendations listing their concerns? Are you, as best as you're able to assess, confident that it captures at least the essence of what we are trying to respond to on these matters?
Very much so.
Okay.
They are detailed. I've looked through that detail to the extent that I can, and with some knowledge of what was in the low-rise code, and absolutely support what has been put forward to you as a recommendation.
Okay, thank you. And final question, if I may, Chair. You've raised concerns about lack of communication from our councillor group. There may be some differing of opinion around the horseshoe here about what we've done to try to communicate to our public, but are there any specific requests that you may suggest? Your previous speaker raised a couple of ideas. Is there any that you have specifically that you think we ought to consider to try to reach our public a little better?
When I look back at the pilot, so Camberwell Junction, which was all occurring during the caretaker period, we did receive a letter from council. There was a forum. Now, when 3 of these 4, so that would be Auburn, Glenferrie and Hawthorn, were announced, that was again during caretaker period, and the CEO wrote. Now, that's what, 10 months ago. It is, I think, really reasonable for the ward councillors who, in some cases, delivered 4 lots of candidature literature to a letterbox again. They had an army. This is really important. If they cannot, if council can't send a letter through the post because of cost, whatever other reason, then get out there. There are plenty of places that posters could be put up. There are places that you could be on the street. You often do that. Come and talk to your councillor. Well, get out on the street on a Saturday, on a Thursday, whenever, and be visible over the next, 13 days?
Councillor Buki.
Thank you, Ms Altman. Similar to Councillor Osborne-Smith, I'm interested in your comments around wanting more communication from council. It was interesting for me that a number of us met with the National Trust of Victoria recently, and they thought that Burundara was one of the leading councils engaging with and communicating with residents about the planning changes and the fact that we had also held forums. And so I just wonder, do you think that people don't read our Burundara Bulletin, or they do? And if they do, and I'm genuinely interested, I'm not trying to be, combative, do you think that, like, we've got 2 pages in our latest Burundara Bulletin, it's the main hard copy form of communication that we have with all our residents. It hits every letterbox that we have access to. I'm just interested in your feedback on that. Do you feel that that's not enough? And the fact that we have mentioned it in all our Burundara bulletins, do you feel that the way that we've presented it is not acceptable to you, or you feel that we should have done it another way?
Firstly, I will acknowledge and thank and have, for the last 12 months, the efforts that officers and councillors have gone to. And in that sense, Burundara is a leader. Just because you're the leader doesn't necessarily mean there's not more or better. And it is actually the language that's been used that is more of a concern than or the amount of information in the bulletin. The actual maps of the rezoning of Camberwell, I don't recall seeing them. I don't recall my local councillor mentioning it in the bulletin. This is absolutely critical. I'm meaning so many people had say to me, oh, and what's happening with Camberwell? Is that still going ahead? And you feel like, really? We had to put pressure on our local MP for him to write because the ward councillors hadn't. The map is really good in this bulletin, and I have put pressure on along with others for a map. It is only when you see a map that you realise. However, the map doesn't actually have 4 to 6 stories on it. It says inner catchment and outer catchment. There's nothing in here that says 4 to 6 stories in residential streets. It's not there. The language...
Sorry to interrupt you, but it does have codes with up to 8 stories, up to 12 stories. We do have colour coding on it.
There it says inner catchment and outer catchment.
So proposed building heights. And we've also got visit the Engage Victoria website to view the 4 activity maps outlining boundary catchments.
Yep.
So
if you want to grab somebody's attention, if you say to them you could have 3 to 4 stories or 4 to 6 stories built in your street or next to them, or built in a street that you know. It doesn't even have to be where you live. There are so many people in BCG who don't live in a catchment but are affected.
So maybe those pictorial that Christina, I think, showed, maybe those would be more effective. Is that what you feel?
Definitely some graphics that really helps. But it's that shock of 3 to 4, 4 to 6 in your street that grabs people. And I wish it were easier. I wish it were easier to get to people, but it's not easy.
Thank you for your feedback.
Councillor Friend Pereira.
Thank you. Ms. Oldman, considering the restrictions for this council and other councillors to be able to share the draft mid-rise residential standards, when was the first time that you or any members of your group became aware of their existence? And have you initiated an FOI request to the state government in order for to be able to publicise the plans in the period that's remaining in the next 2 weeks?
I became aware when the paper became available.
Sorry, that's the officer's recommendations.
Yes.
So that would have been 5 days ago, 10 days ago?
It was 10 days ago.
10 days ago. Have you put in an FOI?
I wish I had time.
Okay.
I've spent my time actually devising a website to provide really clear user information on Kew through to Auburn and the issues that arise from that, whether it's transparency, heritage, consultation.
You understand the reason I'm asking is council is not in a position to share the draft mid-rise standards, but should a member of the public or anybody in the gallery tonight pursue that line, that may be a way of bringing some light to bear so that the actual draft can be circulated amongst the community in general. And I think it would also be worth raising that with local members of parliament.
Thank you. I'll take that advice on. I certainly know people who have FOI'd, and it's been very difficult to get what you're after.
I think that exhausts the questions tonight. Thank you very much for your presentation, and you may resume your seat. Next to join us is Sally Gluyas, and following that will be Nick Tableau.
Good evening, everyone. Sally Gluyas, Hunter Street in Hawthorn. I'm in the Auburn catchment and the Riversdale ward. I'm also a member of the Burundara community group, but given what the others have spoken about tonight, my remarks are going to be very, very brief. I know you probably don't want us repeating what everyone else has told you. I'm going to go straight to Councillor Osborne-Smith's question about how you can do your message to the community, your communication strategy with residents and ratepayers better. These planning reforms, as we all know, are the most significant in Burundara's history. So it is time to step up and do what you should be doing. Some of the things that I was going to say have been mentioned before, but I have 4 points which I will briefly mention. The first one, I think council needs to organise a public rally or public forum, as you did for the Camberwell Junction AC. As Jane and others have mentioned, I believe the Chief Executive Officer or the Mayor, Sophie, should have letterboxed every affected resident and trader, explaining the changes, as you did for the Camberwell Junction AC. The local ward councillors, I feel, should be out door knocking their areas, informing residents of the changes, especially in Hawthorn, Glenferrie and Auburn, and providing a centralised channel for their concerns. I think the City of Burundara's official Facebook site should be used proactively to communicate to residents. I have only seen one post on the official site on the 24th of September, and I acknowledge the Mayor's efforts on her own social media, and I think they have been fantastic, so thank you for that. I want to finish by saying, now is not the time to simply appease the state government. Not even the Police Minister, Anthony Carbines, is appeasing them now. He is fighting a 4-storey apartment development in his own street in Rosanna, and that says something. Now it is the time for you, as our elected representatives, to stand up and be counted, and to fight for the future of our local community. We want you to be seen and to be heard. Thank you.
Councillors, are there any questions of this presenter tonight? There are none. Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Nick Talbot and Liz Burton will follow this presenter.
Thank you. Nick Talbot, Ashburton. And thanks for the opportunity to speak this evening. In particular, I'd like to congratulate the Burundara Council officers for their recommendations. I think they've done an excellent job. I'd like to focus on item 3 of the officers' recommendations, the fact that the Minister for Planning has conducted the consultation confidentially with councils and select stakeholders, rather than the wider community. The state government has fast-tracked planning changes without adequate community and expert comment and review. They promoted the narrative that the activity centre planning changes are urgently needed to address the housing crisis, even though property developers have clearly stated that a backlog of apartments on their market, economic conditions and the taxation framework will mean that land rezoning will not be acted on for many months. The entire activity centre program has been an example of how the government has intentionally limited community participation through carefully orchestrated control of information. The latest notifications to residents in activity centre consultation zones are insufficient. Postcard notices omit crucial planning changes, such as increased building height and density and the removal of appeal rights, effectively denying residents their democratic right to natural justice. Another vital body of evidentiary material has not been supplied to the community, councils and service providers, and these are the Community Infrastructure Needs Assessments and Transport Planning Infrastructure Assessments. Yet the government has produced reports on the 10 pilot activity centres but refuses to release them, even after multiple requests from the Victorian Legislative Council. My own Freedom of Information request for the infrastructure assessment reports was refused by the DTP while claiming, and this is very important, that these documents were distributed to key stakeholders, such as local councils, for comment and review before any public release. Disclosure of the information at this time would be against the public interest owing to the degree of sensitivity of the issues involved. I received confirmation from Burundara Council officers that they have not seen the infrastructure reports for the Campbell Junction Activity Centre. This matches with the responses I've received from other councils affected by the 10 pilot activity centres. Without these reports, councils, service providers and the community will remain in the dark about the cost and feasibility of filling any infrastructure gaps, and I'm sure there will be, caused by increased housing and population densities. The DTP have claimed that community reference groups would help inform activity centre planning. However, their advice seems to have been entirely disregarded in the proposed activity centre map. Definitions for Burundara. In closing, I'd like to request that the Council continue their great effort to demand that the DTP and the state government genuinely engage with the community and that they act with integrity and transparency when making far-reaching planning decisions. Thank you.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr Talbot, for your presentation. You mentioned that you did seek information and you were advised in the interest of disclosure of public interest. Was that along the lines of what you said, that is the reason why the information wasn't provided to you?
Okay.
Because information was provided to local government.
Exactly. So they had stated, so I can give the full details after the meeting, but in denying my request, they said they were draft preliminary reports, even though they were provided to the Planning Minister in timeframe of March 2025. Some of them carry dates well before that, August through to prior to the gazetting of GC 252. And so they're claiming that they're preliminary in draft form, they're exempted because, and as I said, they were distributed to key stakeholders, including councils, okay, for comment and review. Well, of course, as soon as I heard that, I was very surprised because that seemed to contradict everything I'd heard at the inquiry into the VC amendments. And so I asked a few questions and I started asking around the councils, and believe me, they were very forthcoming with their responses, and they were, excellent responses in that.
Thank you very much. And a final question, if I may. So when you were denied or received advice denying request, was that in writing or was it?
Yes, it was in writing.
So you actually have an email trail or correspondence?
I do indeed, yeah.
Thank
and so if I could just make one more comment. So I've taken it for review and it's at OVIC at the moment, and hopefully in due course we'll hear from them.
Yeah, very much appreciated, and I'm sure the officers have got your details on your presentation form to speak this evening for contact reasons. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, Mr Talbot. I now call upon Liz Burden and be followed by Julie Mulhauser.
Good evening, councillors and officers. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Liz Burton, Camberwell. There are two matters that I wish to raise. One relates to the canopy trees, which is a topic identified at 2.4 in the officers.
Ms Burton, that's not specifically something we're dealing with tonight.
It is referred to in the officers' recommendation.
All right, if you speak to it briefly, that'd be fine. Thank you.
I just wish to draw attention to the fact that the new provision, which has been inserted in clause 52.37 in the planning scheme, completely changes the definition of a canopy tree compared with, for example, the City of Burundara's tree protection guidelines. So there is a significant difference. For example, the new height is to be 5 metres above ground level, compared with, at the moment, the circumference of the tree in a Burundara context is to be 110 centimetres at 1.4 metres from ground level. In the new provision, The trunk circumference is to be 500 centimetres at 1.4 metres. So 500 centimetre circumference and a 5 metre above ground level, compared with Burundara's tree protection of canopy trees of 110 centimetres. So this is a significant difference, and it enables significant canopy tree loss right across Burundara. And it means that there will be a vast reduction of the canopy tree, which will be displaced with concrete, which results in greater urban heat island effect and hot suburbs with temperature increases by about 10 degrees Celsius, consistent with western suburbs, where the tree canopy is far reduced in comparison with Burundara. And I think that there needs to be a greater level of recognition of the implications of this change and attention drawn to the state government of exactly what it is enabling. And secondly, last Friday, there was a report in The Age on new flood modelling in relation to climate change by Melbourne Water. Now, this has got very significant implications. In the two municipalities, Darebin and Yarra Council, 60,000 properties are now considered to be flood prone to varying extents in relation to currently 10,000. So currently there are 10,000 properties, which has now been increased to 60,000. Burundara will be modelled by Melbourne Water also, so this will have implications as to the properties that will have a flood-prone cover.
Ms. Burton,
And
can you
this
move towards
relates
wrapping up now?
directly.
Thank you.
Sure. This relates directly to the zoning changes, because the flood hazard levels, for example, state at level 2, which entails 5 metres of 0.5 of a metre of flooding. These areas are not appropriate for increasing housing densities
Thank you, Ms.
without
Burton.
appropriate measures.
Thank you. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. Just one very quick question. You mentioned the Age article. Do you have the date that article was produced?
Yes, certainly. Friday, the 3rd of October, I've got it here.
Oh, that recent. Excellent. And sorry, what's the headline of the article?
The headline is Flood Threat for 60,000 Properties in Inner North.
Thank you very much.
Sure. It's on page 3.
Ms. Burton, we don't appear to have any further questions. Thank you very much for your presentation. I now call upon Julie Mulhauser, and she will be followed by Anne-Larie Pavot.
Good evening. My name's Julie Mulhauser. I live in Canterbury. I'm in support of the officer's recommendation on the Mid-Rise Code. As you're aware, I have for some time been publicly highlighting that there is no evidence that housing affordability will be achieved by planning deregulation. This approach ignores evidence-based actions to improve housing affordability. Council's report on the Mid-Rise Code demonstrates that the state government has repeated the same avoidable mistakes that they made with the townhouse and low-rise code. It's worth reiterating the points made in the Planning Institute submission to the VPP inquiry on the townhouse and low-rise code, that it undoes decades of careful local government planning costing millions of dollars, directed and supported by state government funding and guidance, and that the state governments in that instance, as it is now, properly consult, did not produce evidence on the likely impact of housing supply and affordability. A media release by the PIA Victorian President Pat Fensham labelled the process and the institution of the townhouse and low-rise code as a low point in Victoria's recent planning history. We must remember the urgency, scale and depth of housing unaffordability in Victoria. More than 66,000 people are now on the social housing wait list. That's a 7.4% rise in only 1 year. Over 13,000 Victorians every month are seeking homelessness services due to family violence. More than 10,000 people each month are turning to homelessness services because of housing stress. Victoria's proportion of social housing is only 3%, the lowest in the country. Infrastructure Victoria this year recommended 4,000 new social homes are built annually. However, SGS Economics makes it clear that in fact double that amount needs to be built just for Victoria to catch up to the rest of the nation. I'd like the Council to emphasise to both our community and state government that the state government must urgently build thousands more social homes, and that the major flaw, amongst many, with planning deregulation is that it does nothing to improve housing affordability. Thank you.
It does not appear that we have any questions tonight, Ms. Hauser. Thank you very much for your presentation. Call upon Anne-Laurie, and I'll let you pronounce your last name. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillors, officers, good evening, and thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. My name is Anne-Laure Pio. I'm a resident in the area along Glenferrie Road in Hawthorne. And tonight I want to speak a little bit about my experience in the Glenferrie area. I have been very fortunate to be to have the experience to live in apartments overseas most of my life, in mid-rise and high-rise buildings. I have experienced firsthand how high-density living can be really enjoyable in places like Paris, Singapore, and Washington, D.C., although I wouldn't call them particularly affordable. I have been participating in the activity center consultations, and what I have seen does not give me confidence that we are on the right track to deliver on the promises of more affordable housing or better housing for Victorians. Instead, I see a high risk of irreversible damage to Melbourne's character and livability, and I believe my concerns aligned with those expressed by this council and the Burundara community group. And I will not repeat them. So turning to the draft mid-rise residential standard, I am shocked by the secrecy around those reforms. The fact that the document was shared on a confidential basis is concerning. The deemed to comply aspect of it is concerning. And turning to Glenferrie area, I can definitely confirm that today there is no awareness for 95 people or 99 people of the people that I spoke with around those reforms. Someone mentioned the postcard notice from the government. I still haven't received it. The proposed draft map for Glenferrie is a very good example of a bad outcome of a poorly designed process. I think the mid-rise residential standard applying to those areas in Glenferrie is very concerning because we have a lot of heritage areas that will be eroded, as someone mentioned previously. The core area is very concerning too. We have a stretch of the Glenferrie Road between Kinkora Road and Barkers Road that is earmarked for 12-storey development. Despite its strong heritage character, existing residential buildings, and vibrant street-level life. Meanwhile, the area closer to the train station, which could logically support equal density or even greater density, are limited to 8 stories. So together with a group of residents, we strongly oppose this inconsistency and will urge the government to make the entire core area uniformly capped at 8 stories. And this is critical to preserve sunlight, protect heritage buildings that do exist in those areas, overshadowing of homes and businesses, and maintain Glenferrie's unique character along the Glenferrie Road. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Anne-Marie. Sorry, I didn't catch your surname, so if you don't mind me using your first name. I think you said you've spoken to 95 people that had no awareness?
No, what I said, sorry, is that I spoke to a number of people and 95% or 99% of them were absolutely not aware of any of those reforms, including the activity centres.
Okay.
Yeah.
Look, thank you. That's a concern, but we've certainly heard that a lot tonight, so we'll keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I now call upon Douglas McKinnon, and he will be followed by Sandra Benham.
I'll just get a glass of water, excuse me. My name is Douglas McKinnon. I live in Yule Street, Ashburton, and I've been to a number of the consultation public consultation meetings for areas that aren't specifically Ashburton. I've also spoken to my local member at length, and once again I share the lack of awareness that other speakers have spoken about tonight, the lack of awareness. Neighbours going, hold on, what's going on? And also my engagement with Planning Victoria on the hotline or the helpline, where I rang a number of times and eventually only through talking to my local state member of parliament did I receive a call back. I won't identify my actual profession. I've been in the property industry for nearly 50 years. I've just ticked over the 70, and I'm very concerned. I've seen a lot of property development around Melbourne over the years. I've consulted with property developers, etc., over the years, and I'm concerned, very concerned, if this thing gets started and we get a few developments and we get what's called the surge. It's like when you're selling any development. The initial sales, all the beat up, the marketing, people go, yeah, the developers jump in, and then you'll end up with these developments of 4 and 6 stories, just like we saw and then it'll stall. Another thing that I don't think there's been much modelling on, and they're talking about housing affordability, and again, I'm very careful. I am not a financial advisor, so I can't talk about investments or anything like that, but I have first-hand experience where people have bought apartments off the plan, younger people, paid X dollars. The running costs of these multi-level developments are significant these days, and what actually happens is they sell the property years later for less than they paid for it. So I don't think that the public are seeing the full story here. Again, I'd like to see some modelling on that. St Kilda Road, Docklands, what actually happened in the market. If you're encouraging people to buy, you've introduced the 5% deposit, rah, rah, rah. It's great marketing material, but what actually happens in the long term? That's my concern. And again, I have lived in Victoria basically. I was born here in East Melbourne, and this lack of consultation or lack of this we know best mentality that's coming out in a lot of, just not it's coming out through a number of departments that we know best, is very concerning to me as an older citizen. So we moved, I'll finish up in a minute, we moved from a two-storey house around the corner because I had a serious spinal injury where I could have ended up in a wheelchair. My wife's a retired nurse. She said, we're moving into a single-storey place in Yule Street. We did this, we paid the state government a large chunk of stamp duty.
Mr McKinnon, could you move towards wrapping up? Thank you.
Large chunk of stamp duty, and we might have to pay it again. So where are we getting compensated as older Victorians, etc., etc.? So that's my concern. All right, thank you.
There doesn't appear to be any questions. Thank you for your presentation. I call upon Sandra Benham to join us.
You won't see me if I sit down. My name's Sandra Beenham. I live in Hawthorn. Unlike many of the people who've spoken tonight, I'm not part of the Burundara community group. I come here as an independent, so to speak. But I guess the reason I'm here is that my concern about, and I have not read all of the document. I did not know about it until today, so forgive me that I don't know the detail. But the main concern that I wanted to express about a 4 to 6 story development is the degree to which it will change the character of the demographics of this area. If we just reflect on the fact that within the Glenfrey, Hawthorn, Auburn area, it's got a very high level of educational facilities, primary schools, secondary schools. I'm putting aside for the moment Swinburne University. The reason those schools exist is because most of the people who have children attending those schools live locally, especially those with primary age school children. I've already had feedback from a near neighbour to say that one of the schools locally to where I live is already short of children in the primary, in this primary school. And this is directly associated with the fact that it's becoming unaffordable for families with young children to live in this area. That is not going to improve with 4 to 6 story developments because primarily developers will only be interested in having 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. This is not a family-friendly policy. It is something which I do not believe has been considered in any of the discussions about densification of housing in this area. I would like to leave that thought with council and with fellow residents, because in not taking into account the education within this area and the need for families to have affordable family accommodation in this area, we are going to change the area, the qualities, the values that have been so important. The other side effect of this, of course, is that families who want their children to attend schools in the city of Burundara are going to have to live elsewhere. So the unintended consequence of this change in homes in the area, and I use homes in inverted commas because we are talking about flats, is that those people will be living elsewhere. And if you thought that the traffic congestion was bad now, at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day, you haven't seen anything yet. So that's where I want to end. I just hope that some of these factors can be taken into consideration when considering the built environment for homes in this area. Thank you.
Thanks for your comment. Councillor Rabuki.
Thank you for that impassioned speech, Ms. Durham. I just wonder, do you think that, some mix of housing might be a good thing? I would love my children to be able to move out of home and afford something here, and I wouldn't expect them to be able to afford a house at first. And do you think that maybe it might be good to have some essential workers or nurses or teachers who can live in the area who might not want a house?
I absolutely agree with you. 1 and 2 bedroom apartments or flats are very important as part of the mix for all the reasons that you've outlined. What I am pointing to is the fact that this is an education precinct with very important consequences for people who live in the area. 1 and 2 bedroom flats are not family friendly. And so that's really the point that I wanted to make tonight. And I think that I attended the drop-in centre on Saturday morning and raised this with one of the people from the DTP at that meeting. And they said, well, if you were the planning minister, what would you do about it? And the answer that I gave them is the answer that I will share with you now, which is that there needs to be a policy that within the structure of the new codes or standards, there needs to be some commitment to 3 and 4 bedroom apartments, which are not luxury
apartments, because they are not going to be, developers are not going to build 4 to 6 story apartments of 3 and 4 bedroom. It's much more, the business model for that relies on 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, not 3 and 4 bedroom apartments.
Thank you for that. I'll just say very quickly that many of the planning applications that we do get align with what you've just said, that they're aimed at bespoke, expensive builds that are for retirees and so on. So I agree with your comment there. Thank you.
Councillor Osborne-Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for your presentation. I think your points land well, and I think many of us around this horseshoe appreciate the concerns that you raised about the dwindling number of family homes in our municipality, which is a worry for many of us here tonight. I'm just curious to understand practically where you think there might be an opportunity that council may be able to advocate or influence in this space, because you will of course appreciate that council can't mandate what developers build. We can't dictate the market about what sort of products will sell in the market, and we don't control social and affordable housing to a large degree. That's not our remit. So I'm wondering if you might have any suggestions as to practical things that council may be able to do to try to influence some of the concerns that you've raised about dwelling sizes and bedroom numbers.
As I said at the beginning of my comments, I'm a newbie into this whole process, but I am just super aware of as you've outlined, the dwindling number of families who can afford to live in the city of Boroondara. I don't have a magic wand. I don't really have the skill set to even think how that might. All I can point to is the fact that there is a desperate need for advocacy for family affordable housing in this area. And if this council can't do it for this area, then I think you guys should all just pack up and go home, frankly. I'm sorry, I'm being very straight speaking about that. But I'm just watching this process, and I'm coming in right at the end from the look of it, and just going, are you not looking around? Who do you think are living in these 1 and 2 bedroom apartments? They are singles and couples. They don't have an investment in this community. They don't have the passion that everybody who's spoken tonight, who've had families here, put roots down, care about the area in which they live. People, despite the people that you've outlined, the workers, the kids moving out of home, they're going to be living single lives, couples' lives. They're not going to be supporting the local kids' footy coaching. They're not here to care about the built environment. They're not here to care about the tree canopies. They are living singles' lives. They are leading couples' lives. They are in transition. And unless we make some effort to have affordable, family-friendly housing in this area, then we're talking about a very different place. So I'm sorry I can't give you the answer. I'd love to. But I just think those are the points that we as a community have to be aware of and committed to. Otherwise, we are not reflecting the assets and the wonderful place that we all live in.
Councillor Nolan.
Thank you, Sandra. Did I get that right?
Oh, by the way, my name is Beanham, B-E-A-N-H-A-M. I'm not a bear, I'm not a bee, I'm a Beanham.
Beanham. Thank you, Ms. Beanham.
It's like baked beans.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Hines would be proud of me.
Thank you. And thanks for the comments you've made and the discussion. I'm just, in terms of under the umbrella of protecting heritage, which I think is the thrust of tonight in the 4 to 6 story, are you getting at the issue of protecting the existing family housing, or are you really pointing to council towards ensuring we build more affordable 3 to 4 story
housing or apartments, i.e. new housing stock for families. Is that what you're saying, or are you talking about the protection?
I leave the protection issues to other people. What I'm pointing to is the need for family-friendly, family-affordable accommodation. I will leave the discussion about social housing and all of those issues. People have talked to that already. I'm here to talk about family-friendly because people want to live and educate their kids in this city, and this city has the most extraordinary depth of educational assets, and we are just letting that disappear. And I think unless we can stand up and point to those assets and the unique qualities of this community, and if we can't provide the sort of housing and the sort of homes for people to benefit from that, then I think we're failing.
Thank you. Thanks for the clarification.
Thanks very much for your presentation, Ms. Beanham. I will now return to officers for matters arising.
Thanks, Chair. I might just kick off first, and then again I'll hand over to Ms. Caparaso to talk to some of the specifics of the code or the standards, draft standards as they've been outlined. Much of the discussion this evening has focused in on the activity centres and the activity centre changes, and I did in the introduction outline how these two things do come together. The new draft standards come together with the new activity centres. So it's no surprise that there is that discussion. There is a little bit of confusion in some of the comments that have been provided in relation to how those things work with each other. I note Ms. Brannigan in questions from Councillor Hollingsworth, there was some clarification around the reference to 3- and 6-storey development, and what that was referring to is what is allowed in the housing choice and transport zone within the catchments of the activity centres. And the housing choice and transport zone 1 allows up to 4 stories and 5 to 6 stories on larger sites of 1,000 square metres. In the housing choice transport zone 2, it's up to 3 stories and up to 4 stories on the larger 1,000 square metre sites. So that reference to the heights and what's allowed within those housing choice and transport zones, that are in the catchment areas around the activity centres, is absolutely correct. And the way these new draft standards work is they overlap with those particular zones. So where a zone allows up to 6 stories, then the new standards kick into place and would allow up to 6 stories as of right if the new standards are met. And it would mean that there's no ability for council to form any other view other than approve a development that meets those standards, and residents, whilst they can object, would not have a right of appeal to VCAT. So it's just, I just wanted to highlight that it can get quite confusing, but the 6-storey standards will only kick in up to 6 stories where the underlying zone allows up to 6 stories. So in an area such as a neighbourhood residential zone, which still only allows up to 2 stories, this code will not override that 2-storey limit within the underlying zone and allow something higher than what the existing zone does. So the two things do interact with each other in that way. And I think there was some reference, and Ms. Oldham talked about clause 65 and the decoupling of the standards with clause 65 and the unintended consequences. And that absolutely is a concern that we are raising with these new standards, because we have raised with the Department of Transport and Planning the unintended consequences of decoupling the overall Clause 65 expectations and obligations in the planning scheme from the low-rise code standards. But that's being embedded again with these new standards for the mid-rise developments. Now, we hope and anticipate that that will be addressed because there are some significant concerns that come up with that decoupling, particularly in areas where there's ESD or environmental issues that might apply to a site. So that certainly is something of a key concern. I did want to touch on the discussion about what notifications have occurred or what information has been provided around the new activity centre changes that are proposed, particularly the Tranche 1 Stage 2 consultation underway at the moment. And there has been quite a significant amount of information provided by Council. The website has been updated on a couple of occasions. The bulletin, the most recent bulletin that's been released, goes to every property in the municipality. Now, a decision was made not to send individual letters because of the expense, but also the doubling up of the letters would have actually been received at the same time the bulletin was received, which seemed a bit of a unreasonable double up from a cost point of view, but also a confusion for residents, that the focus within the bulletin, which we know is very well read, was the decision that was made there in terms of getting that coverage to every household in the municipality. And the Facebook has been mentioned. That has been used, and it's been used in quite an incisive way because Facebook can be used for specific locations, and there's been communications through Facebook, and that will continue right through to the end of the consultation period to get some nuanced, targeted consultation to residents for specific locations where there are individual impacts. So there's certainly been quite a bit of information distributed and pointing to the consultation process that is being undertaken by the Department of Transport and Planning. But we were also promised perhaps broader and wider consultation by the department as well as part of this process, and whilst there has been some commentary about that being a little bit underwhelming, there certainly have been some concerns from officers about the extent of that and way that's being done is not quite what was anticipated. I just probably will touch on one other item and then I'll hand over to Ms. Caparaso, and that was in regard to the comments by Mr. Talbot about the infrastructure reports and infrastructure reports for Camberwell. And I can confirm that we are aware that reference has been made to those reports being provided to Council. They haven't been in regard to Camberwell, despite the planning changes being embedded a number of months ago, earlier this year. And we have asked for that documentation previously from the Department of Transport and Planning. So we can confirm that that is the case. I'll now hand over to Ms. Caparaso to talk about any other specific comments in regard to the draft standards that have been raised.
Thank you. Just a couple of small things to note. These mid-rise standards will only apply in residential zones, so they won't apply in the commercial zones that we saw before. That will continue to be Clause 58. And applicants can still lodge applications at 1 to 3 levels in this area, and that will be considered under the low-rise code at Clause 55, which is already in the scheme. There was reference to the canopy tree provision at Clause 52.37, which is relatively new, that's come in, and that will work alongside this code in a similar way that car parking is, for example. So it will sit alongside. And in terms of the dwelling diversity objective that we talked about, there is actually a standard in the existing Clause 55 and in the proposed mid-rise code where there is a requirement for one dwelling of 3 bedrooms for every 10 dwellings. So there is an aspect of that that's in there, and that's not proposed to be changed as part of this mid-rise code. Thank you.
That's it. Councillors, are there any questions of officers? Councillor Rabuki.
Thank you through you, Chair, and thank you, Ms Caparoso and team for providing the detailed response to the State Government draft mid-rise residential standards. You've pointed out in your report and in the officer's recommendation that there's been a reduction in livability of many of the standards, and I just wondered whether there were any levers that might be available to council to flag or to encourage developers to provide better livability standards than those that are now recommended if they pass. For instance, would we have any levers that we could pull, for instance, having something on our website that shows planning applications that are made, and maybe something like a tick box approach where we could indicate that they have exceeded, you know, planning standards, something like that. I know that you also currently talk to planning applicants and you give them the guide for design excellence and you talk about what we would like to see. I'm just wondering if we can take that a step further. If it seems that the government isn't going to provide livability standards that are better or meet what we have now, then what can we do as a council?
Thanks, Chair. Happy to touch on that a little bit and perhaps just firstly comment on our experience to date with the low-rise code and what has happened and has occurred. As a result of the deemed to comply being introduced, applicants are encouraged and are incentivised to try and make their development deemed to comply. So their starting point is to tip it into that approach rather than thinking more broadly about the site context and the development outcome and how that works for the location. And that traditionally was the approach to planning in the performance-based planning. So even where someone was considering a development where they were intending on meeting all of the standards, they were still thinking in that broader context. And that ability to negotiate with applicants improved outcomes or additional expectations in terms of quality actually was open to us. And it's something that we did do quite a bit of and talked about the outcome. And as I say, that incentivisation of applicants to meet the deemed to comply at all costs has actually really pulled that away quite significantly from officers' ability, despite suggestions or indications. It's become quite problematic. We do have our Burundara Good Design Guide, so we do reference that. We are promoting good design. We will continue to talk about what good design means at Burundara. The Good Design or Urban Design Awards this year is an example of promoting what's good about design outcomes that improve livability and appropriateness for a Burundara context. But it is quite difficult in the context of the way these new standards have been designed to achieve that negotiated outcome that improves the design that we normally.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. I understand that. So I'm just wondering what step further can we take? Is there some way that we can provide some transparency or some consequence to developers to incentivise them to do better? So as I said before, maybe by having a report of applications that we receive, they might deem to comply, but what we could do is we could have some sort of rating system where they exceed the deemed to comply. I'm just wondering whether, you know, those sorts of things might be at all possible.
Yeah, absolutely. They're things that we can look at. I certainly would be cautioning against a punishment approach for someone that met the minimum standards, but certainly the encouragement side of the equation is something that can be looked at and considered.
Well done. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Chair. I have a series of questions, so I'll try and be brief. Ms. Caparoso, you talked about the 1 by 10 3-bedroom requirement. Is there a flexibility for the developer or the applicant to have that waived if they put forward an expression that they want to do, you know, more of a 1 to 2 bedroom? Is there flexibility for them to alter that? Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the standard is there, but it can be varied. And that would be something that we would assess it on the merits of the proposal. So it's there, but it can be varied, yeah.
And so then that would be either with the deemed to comply or compensated in some other way, developer contribution perhaps, or there's other mechanisms to them to work within the framework to desire a different outcome?
We would look at things like context, how big the development is, the location. If it's next to a university, maybe we would, you know, there's different things that we might consider that might influence whether we would allow for a variation in terms of the diversity of housing.
I understand the demographic and the need of that area. Thank you. My second question is with regard to clause 65, and it is fairly explicit in the guidelines where it's referenced to the local planning policy framework. And it was Ms. Oldham's presentation that made me do a little bit more research on that. Do you think the council will have greater control over areas where there is native vegetation, the threat of land degradation and flooding, to actually have some stronger influence of what would be appropriate, or do you think, again, the deemed to comply will just take precedence?
Thank you. The way that it's been written currently is that it turns it off, and it turns those factors like flooding, other things like contamination of land, which we don't have as much of here, but hearing other councils talk about that as being a really big issue. So there's a number of factors that just this deemed to comply switches off that we find really problematic, and we would like to switch it back on.
Thank you.
Chair, I might just add to that this is an issue that is of concern to a number of councils. And in fact, the planning directors from all of the activity centre councils that have been regularly meeting recently wrote to the Department of Transport and Planning raising specific concerns about the unintended consequences of turning off clause 65, because it is of utmost concern that an issue, for example, and Ms. Caparoso just mentioned it, an issue such as contamination can now slip through the net, and not that we've got significant contamination in any sites here, but an issue like contamination can slip through the net. Even if we know about it, we have no right to do anything about it and must approve a deemed to comply development. So that's an example of a consequence where we must approve a deemed to comply development on a contaminated site where we know of that contamination. Now, there are other ways that needs to be dealt with, but effectively we will have to sign off on that permit because the clause 65 is turned off. Now, when the clause 65 was not turned off, when that was available to us, we had an obligation to turn our mind to those sorts of issues and would not have issued a permit in that scenario. So that's just one example, and that's why as directors, we collectively have got together and written to the department and say, you've got to fix this because this is not a good outcome for our planning system.
Which is why we, as Burundara residents, very much support Burundara being the responsible planning authority, because you would, as a planning director, navigate it in a way that you have in the past. So I can understand the community concern. I'm very concerned by this. And sorry, my final question, and it's to do with media and communication. So I'm not sure who to address this to, but I just want to ask it and if it can be captured. If we could do additional comms with Facebook, Instagram, and consider WeChat. I don't know if we've used WeChat or not, so it's just something that I'll flag and we can discuss later. And I think the other one's called Wheezing, so that there's elements of community that perhaps we haven't captured yet. And I'll leave it there, thank you.
Thanks through yourself, Chair. Absolutely happy to make sure that there's additional Facebook messaging that occurs. That's certainly planned. Can't comment on WeChat, but sorry.
Councillor Osborne-Smith.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, officers. This, given much of the concern we're hearing from the public tonight is about communication or lack thereof, I'm just wondering if, for the benefit of us around the table here tonight and those members of the public in the audience, whether you could just remind us what information is on the website, just in a high level, because it feels to me that all roads often lead to the website. That's where we try to direct most inquiries and most traffic, and I'm keen to understand and perhaps if you could remind us what information is on the website and whether, in your opinion, that captures everything we need to say.
Through yourself, Chair, absolutely. The reason for directing people to our website is because that is where we update information, but there's where there is the entire history as well. So if we update the information there, it means that we can get it out and we can link people into it very quickly and readily. So if we do a Facebook post, we can draw people back to our website. In this case, the consultation underway for the activity centres is actually being undertaken by the Department of Transport and Planning. This is not our activity centre plan. This is not our activity centre planning process. And so we are using information on our website and other communications to direct people to lodge submissions with the Department of Transport and Planning. So whilst we are updating our website and explaining what we're doing and what we know, we are absolutely pointing people back to the Department of Transport and Planning because they are the ones undertaking this consultation.
Yeah, just as a quick follow-up, as I quickly look through the website, it seems a very comprehensive source of information. There's maps, there's the info from the DTP and feedback, the proposed tram and train catchment zones, all the updates from Council about what efforts you're undertaking, Planning Environment Act review, Plan for Victoria, stuff on the junction, the townhouse and low-rise code. In my sort of high-level assessment, seems a pretty comprehensive source of information. I just want to get assurances from you that you agree with that and that, in fact, that website is as up-to-date and as well executed as possible, given that all roads potentially could lead to that source of information. Thank you.
Councillor Tourney.
Thanks, Chair. I want to kind of jump into the document and our recommendations and our thoughts on it. I'm interested, of course, in the solar side of things, and I was a bit concerned to see the two comments. One was around the no longer needing a requirement for, just trying to look for the words for it, to set aside space in the development for rooftop solar generation. So I just want to clarify, so if a 6-storey apartment's being built under these standards and deemed to comply, there's no requirement for space on the rooftop for solar, and there has been in the past? Sorry, I didn't mean to ask a tricky question.
Good question.
Thank you. No, it's not a tricky question. There has been, in the low-rise code, there is a provision that requires part of the roof to be set aside for solar, either now or in the future. That's been taken away. Also, what's been taken away through this is the overshadowing to existing solar panels as well, which is something that was previously.
That was my next question, because that scares me. So you're saying that in a street where there is a number of houses with solar panels on their roof, in the past, if you were building a 6-storey building, you would have to consider that and design the building around so you're not blocking that light, and that's gone.
That's correct.
Okay. I have another question.
Just to follow up that through you, Mayor, and what's more concerning is the removal of our ability to get into ESD assessments and not just have space set aside for a potential future solar panel, but actually seeking a level of generation and having some policy support to require an amount of actual solar panels.
Yep. Very disappointing, I think. I've got another question, it's a little bit different. It goes to the codification of this. I'm assuming this is all about, from what I'm hearing, that this is about simplifying planning. They want planning permits to go through quickly and simply and easily, which is the deemed to comply. Is there a way of making this, are there any conditions under which that would actually work, that you would feel comfortable as planners? And, whether that's the recommendations on setbacks that we're putting forward or disagreeing with, overshadowing, things like the solar, the Clause 65, introduction of design quality. Could it get to that point where you would be satisfied that you could say, you know what, that's a good code, deemed to comply, seems to work in that, and seems to work on that basis?
Through yourself, Chair, the introduction of deemed to comply under the low-rise and townhouse standards was done in 2 phases. And phase 1 was the obvious, measurable standards that you're referring to. Front setbacks, heights of buildings, overshadowing expectations, overlooking expectations. So there certainly are standards that it's reasonable to set a specific outcome and expect that if that standard is met, that element or objective is generally met. So I think that's fair to say that there are elements where a deemed to comply approach is not unreasonable. It's the removal of the broader considerations in the planning system. It's the shift to a review of development from a tick box approach as opposed to considering the context in the neighbourhood character and the elements that apply on that particular site. And in this case, and as it was with the low-rise and townhouse code when the second stage was brought in, and we keep talking about deemed to comply, but there were 2 things that happened. One is it was made deemed to comply, and the second thing that happened is the standards were reduced. So the outcome is a lesser or poorer outcome. If the existing standards that were in the system were simply made deemed to comply, we wouldn't be having anywhere near the same extent of concerns.
So that answers my question.
The primary driver has actually been about the lowering of the standards.
Yep.
And the inability for community input, the inability to review if there's concerns about tree outcomes or ESD outcomes or solar panels or those sorts of elements.
But couldn't you get to the point, if you were happy with the standards, if the heritage overlays, if the new toasty zones did not include, the heritage overlays were excluded from those, the standards, you could get to the point where would you worry less about the lack of
Absolutely.
community?
If the standards were at a higher standard
Yep.
and protected the outcomes, absolutely you can get a lot closer to a deemed to comply approach. As I keep saying, it's not just the deemed to comply that is the concern or driver here, it is the lowering of standards as well.
Yep, one more question, Chair, quick. So do you feel that in that report, we have been really super clear on what we would consider those standards to be? Instead of just responding yes, no, and with commentary, Is there an opportunity in a letter that would just really outline that really super clearly that we could advocate strongly on?
Thank you. I might answer that one. So the way that the DTP have sought our feedback is actually like a Google document. And it's literally, do you want option A or option B? Provide some comments. So that's why the report's sort of been set out that way, but we'll also provide an email response as well, detailing some of these concerns. And going to your concern about, is there a standard we could, get behind? I think what's quite concerning about the mid-rise code is, take for example the street setback. So the low-rise code, so up to 3 stories, it's a 6 metre setback, and then what's being proposed for above 4 stories to 6 stories is 4.5 metres. So it's not quite, I think from an officer perspective, we're not quite understanding, you've got a larger development, how come the standards are less? When you've got a smaller development, the standards are more. It's not, those standards don't match up.
And the irony at the moment under the existing scenario for a single dwelling, it has to be further back again. Now that's going to get changed, but it's got to be the average of the 2 adjoining. So we've got quite a paradoxical standard scenario at the moment.
Councillor Friend Pereira.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to try and leverage the expertise that's sitting up there tonight. We heard the issue of affordability come up several times. I've done a quick search of the draft, and the word affordability does not appear once. It does in officers' reports. Can the experts sitting up give a sense of what, if you were at the driving seat of this, what might you look for in a draft medium-rise code that would address the question of affordability or how to achieve affordability? And I say that in the context that this entire housing strategy by the state government is on the pretext that they are supposed to be driving down or creating more affordability.
Thanks, and again through yourself, Chair. I think that comes back to submissions, comments and positions put forward by this council, and certainly at officer advice and officer positions on a number of occasions around these planning reforms. We have not seen any evidence that supports these changes will drive affordability. There's no evidence or information around that. And there certainly isn't anything in these mid-rise standards that suggests to us that it's going to lead to affordability. It's not, for example, reducing front setback standards or increasing the closeness that a development can go to side boundaries. Those things in themselves do not lead to increased yield. They do not lead to increased affordability. There's no credible evidence that would show a link between those things. They might, in fact, have a consequence that's opposite to that. And there's some indications and suggestions with the low-rise code changes that it's simply led to larger townhouses and larger developments, which are even less affordable. So that actually might even be the consequence of these changes. We don't know yet. We don't have a lot of evidence yet. That remains to be seen. But yes, this is not the way of addressing affordability. We've put in our submissions many, many times. It's not, in fact, the planning system that's going to be the biggest driver of affordability. It will be many other factors.
Councillor Franco.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask some additional information in relation to a point raised by Ms Caparoso and one of the speakers, Ms Beanham. An issue that was raised was dwelling diversity and the need to ensure family-friendly, affordable homes in our community. And the advice we got was that the dwelling diversity code or rules are in clause 55, and I think it's 1 3-bedroom per 10 apartments or 1 2-bedroom per 10 apartments. Do those not apply? Do they also apply for the mid-rise code, and do they apply in the commercial core areas, the dwelling diversity provisions, such as the Camberwell Junction activity core? There's a couple of other parts to the question, but just starting with that.
They do, yes. They apply in the mid-rise code and they apply in the commercial core as well.
Thanks. Okay. And similarly, in relation to the solar panels issue, is it only in the mid-rise code that the removal of the solar access provisions occurs?
That's correct. In the draft code that's been circulated, they're removed. They are still in the clause 55 for the low rise.
And in relation to dwelling diversity, I mean, it's not a very high bar, one apartment being 2-bedroom and one apartment being 3-bedroom out of 10. If officers are not in a position to answer this, that's fine, but are we aware of any other examples in Victoria interstate? I'm certainly aware of one interstate where the standard's higher, but has there been any discussion of increasing? I'm sure under the current provision, increasing is not on the minds of the government, but are we aware of any advocacy efforts in that respect?
Again, through yourself, Chief, certainly it's been an issue raised by many councils in their submissions and certainly by the MAV around, and the Planning Institute of Australia around diversity of housing and whether the relevant planning provisions are leading to that. But no, it hasn't, other than that, it's not certainly been raised.
Thanks. And another question, if I might, Chair, just a different topic. Ms Brannigan raised the issue in New South Wales where the planning changes there are skirting around or not including heritage areas. I know this is the case certainly in the Inner West Council of Sydney where Haberfield has been excluded, Balmain's been excluded, heritage precincts in Ashfield have been excluded. Is this something that council officers can look at in future advocacy to take any learnings from the New South Wales examples? I'm not sure if it's something we've looked at. I don't expect you to have looked at it, but is it something you could look at for future purposes if you haven't?
Again, through yourself, Chair, we are aware of the New South Wales approach, which is a very different system, but by and large, our understanding is that the heritage areas have been excluded from the higher density expectations around rail stations and activity centres, but that's something that we'll have a look at when the opportunity arises.
Thank you.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. I thought all lights were off and I was wanting to foreshadow to move the motion, but I'm not sure. Is now that appropriate time?
They are all off, and I think we're ready to move to search of a motion. You were just about to move one, I presume.
I would like to, and I'd like to propose a minor amendment.
Would you like to, this is the time to...
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, sorry, before you, no, put your amendment and then we'll go through the other motions.
Sorry?
Go through your amendments proposed. So that's really sorting out the motion you're proposing.
Yes. Look, I'd like to move the officer recommendation with an amendment to include the recommendations also be shared with all elected representatives, state and federal, so that they're aware of what Burundara's submission is. And I know rather than name all the names, we're aware of who the state and federal members are that cover the jurisdiction of the Burundara community. So if there's an easy terminology to include that in one paragraph.
Are we okay to add that to the motion? Just give us a moment, we'll bring that up on the screen.
Thank
you.
Chair, through you, can I make a suggestion to the proposer of the motion?
Please do.
Just that the wording will need to consider what we can and can't share as far as the confidential attachments.
I think we're just having that looked at now. Thank you.
Thanks.
Councillor Sinfield's question is, can we share these things?
Again, through yourself, Chair, in the context of our approach, which has been made clear to the Department of Transport and Planning in regard to endorsing of our council position, and that would be part of a public report to council, I'd be comfortable exercising this particular recommendation. It's not providing the draft code, it's explaining why we've got the position that we have, and the only way you can do that is by revealing some of that information.
Thank you.
Okay. Number 4 has been added. Councillor Hollingsworth, are you happy with that as your motion?
I am, thank you.
Do we have a seconder to the motion as it now appears on the screen?
Can I just make a small alteration to those words? I think it should say elected representatives for area covered by Burundara.
Very happy with that, thank you.
Right. You happy with that, Councillor Nolan, as an addition? Okay, Councillor Hollingsworth, are you happy with it?
Very happy, thank you.
All right, there's a lot of lights up on the screen. Can we sort out who's going to be the seconder for this motion?
Whoever's top of the list.
Councillor Sinfield, you come up next. Would you like to second?
I would, thank you.
Fantastic. Do we have any opposition to the motion as it now appears? We don't. Fantastic. Councillor Hollingsworth, would you now like to speak to your motion?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank Mr Walker as the Director of Planning and all the officers here this evening for their presentation of the report, the amount of information that they've actually provided, and for their indulgence in allowing us to ask quite a lot of questions this evening. I would also like to thank all of the presenters in the gallery for their heartfelt presentations and for their articulation of elements that we as councillors and possibly even as officers may not have considered certain aspects of, and by them bringing that to our attention, I think it's helped strengthen our resolve to provide advocacy to the state in support of seeking more, and obviously the conditions and recommendations put here in this officer motion and hopefully councillor supported motion will explain to the Minister the passion that we share with our community and how we would strive to deliver a better outcome with reforms. So I believe I've said enough. I know the MAV is the Municipal Association of Victoria and the peak body of all 79 councils to hold Burundara in high regard, and I'm sure that they'll be very interested in our report and recommendations as well. And I would now like to ask my councillor colleagues to please support the motion. Thank you.
Councillor Sinfield, do you want to speak at this time? I notice there's at least one light on and I'm going to allow brief comments from others. Do you wish to speak now or hold your comments?
Thank you for your generosity, Chair, but I note that it's unopposed. We're all very passionate about it, but I think the motion speaks for itself. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Tawney.
Thanks, Chair. I do want to say a couple of things because I think Tonight, we've heard more broadly about the activity centres, and I wanted to speak directly to this motion because I have a number of concerns. Because we do support housing growth, but it's not at any cost. And we've heard from officers that these standards weaken the safeguards and they lower the standards at the moment, where at the very moment they're very much needed. So to remove the rights of residents to have a say in the neighbourhood, in their neighbourhoods, and reduce the standards is really problematic. I'm also deeply concerned that the draft standards treat sunlight, it's like a negotiable extra, when it's fundamental to how people live, and also how we transition to renewables. So by removing those solar protections we discussed tonight and the rooftop generation requirements, we're literally building shadows over the very homes we want to electrify and not allowing for new apartment builds or not ensuring new apartments builds to potentially have solar. So that makes no sense to me, and it's in direct contrast to the government's energy policies, and not only risks further solar uptake, but potentially diminishes current installations. So that's just not smart planning. It's short-term yield potentially over long-term resilience. So in the coming weeks, Council will release alternative activity centre plan visions that can show how the growth the state government is looking for can be achieved without resorting to cookie-cutter policy that fails to respect our local communities. So I understand the need, the drive to codify standards to simplify planning, but at what cost? I think growth must enhance neighbourhoods, not erode them, and right now these standards don't meet that test. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Tawny. Unless anyone else got desperate need to say something, I feel a need to now move this motion. I will now put this motion. Those in favour? Is anyone against? None. I now declare the motion as amended and shown on the screen as carried. Thank you. We will now move to item 4.2 on the agenda, C413, Planning Scheme Anomalies, Privately Owned Land, Outcomes of Exhibition. This will be presented, the officer's report tonight will be presented by Rachel Bryan.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, good evening, councillors, officers and attendees. The purpose of this report is to inform the Urban Planning Delegated Committee of the outcomes of public exhibition of Amendment C413 BORO seeking to correct zone and overlay anomalies for 37 properties across the municipality that are privately owned. The amendment was publicly exhibited from 31st of July to the 14th of August in 2025, and 4 submissions were received, including 2 supporting submissions and 2 opposing submissions. We also received a submission from VicTrack relating to VicTrack owned land that was supportive. We recommend splitting the amendment into 3 parts. So part 1 relates to properties for which no submission or only supporting submissions have been received. And part 2 relates to Wentworth Avenue, Canterbury, which is recommended to be abandoned, outlined in the report. Part 3 relating to 3 to 5 and 17 Lynch Street, for which an opposing submission has been received. Splitting the amendment will facilitate the progression of anomalies that have no submissions or only supporting submissions, and we won't proceed with to Wentworth Avenue, and will refer the outstanding submissions to an independent planning panel for consideration, which is required under Section 23 of the Planning and Environment Act. No changes are recommended to the proposed correction of zoning and overlay anomalies, aside from the removal of 2 Wentworth Avenue from the amendment. Officers recommend splitting the amendment, and let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.
Councillors, as there are no public submissions tonight on this matter, we can move straight to questions of officers, if you have any. Councillor Friend Pereira.
If there are no questions for officers, I'm happy to move the officers' recommendations.
Is there a seconder to that motion? Councillor Barlier.
So seconded, Chair.
Right, terrific. So I will now move directly. Is anyone opposed to it? Well, there was no one. Councillor Friend Pereira, would you like to speak to your motion?
It's a very straightforward piece of work done by the officers. All questions I've had have already been answered. Therefore, I'm more than happy to move the motion.
And I think, Councillor Baillieu, you're happy to proceed? Thank you very much. I will now put the motion. Those in favour? No one against? No one opposed. Thank you. I declare the motion carried. General business. Are there any matters of general business that need to be raised this evening? There's not. Any urgent business? Confidential business? There are none. I see some smiles around the room. Have I missed something? Great, thank you. Before I close the meeting, I want to thank all who have joined us this evening, and I declare the Urban Planning Delegated Committee meeting closed. Thanks very much.